What's going on, you guys? TBR here, back yet again with another 7 Nights 2 video, and in today's video I am going to be bringing you guys a guide on which characters you are going to want to prioritize in 7 Nights 2, as well as giving you equipment recommendations for each one of them. But before we get into all of that, make sure if you guys haven't already done so that you smash that like button and subscribe if you're new here, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. Cue the intro. Alright, you guys, now quick disclaimer before we get into the guide, but I am only going to be covering from the great tier characters up, so I will not be covering any of the silver border characters in this video, mainly because no matter when you download the game, you probably aren't ever going to need to really use those, as you can just go ahead and use your green border characters and up, and you'll be just fine. I'm also going to be spending as little time as possible on each one of these characters, with giving you guys as much information as possible. So I'm going to try and get through this without this being a 30-minute long guide. But with all of that being said, you guys, let's go ahead and get into the video. So the first character I want to talk about, and the first pool of characters that I want to get into, is going to be the great tier rarity. These are going to be your green border characters, and the first character that I want to talk about is Claire. Now Claire is going to be a ranged character. She's going to be extremely good for a lot of different scenarios in the game, mainly your story mode, and then many of your dungeons, even your 8-man raids. Mainly the reason for this is this character is going to be able to increase the crit rate of all of your allies, and in this game, critical rate is extremely important, so keep that in mind. Crit is always going to be something that you want to focus on for the most part for a lot of your damage dealers, and in general, Claire being able to increase the crit rate of all of your allies is extremely beneficial. Now another thing that she's very good at is she's also going to be able to remove buffs, so this is another thing that is going to make her very useful as a green border character, and I would recommend that you guys go with critical gear, or you may even consider going with attack gear, but mainly I would try to go with crit gear with her, because that is of course going to be her bread and butter. Moving down the line now, we're going to talk briefly about Miss Velvet. Now, Miss Velvet is a character that you would want to use for specific things such as some of your dungeons. She's also going to be a character that's very good for defense reduction. If you take a look at her overall kit, she is going to be able to decrease the defense of the opponent. So this is a character that can be extremely useful. This is another character that's going to fall into that DPS category for the most part, and I would again recommend either going with critical gear or attack gear, but mainly I would prefer critical gear over attack for the most part with most of these characters as mentioned, but you can go with either one of those and probably do just fine. Just know that if you're trying to min-max, that you are going to want to go with critical gear. Next up, we're going to take a look at our first tank, and this is going to be Adele. Now, Adele is a very, very good character for a budget tank. He is going to be a character that is going to help you out quite a bit throughout the early story mode, and with Adele, he is also going to be a character that you can definitely use later on in a few of the different raids and get a lot of work out of him. Now, with this character, you are going to want to either go with defensive gear or block gear, whichever one is going to be the most readily accessible for you. You could even mix and match those if you really wanted to, like most of your tanks in the game. But as far as Adele is concerned, he is a wonderful budget tank, so if you're somebody that finds yourself needing that, then this is going to be a character that you're definitely going to want to take a look at. Now next up, I want to go ahead and talk about a couple of characters really briefly here, because these characters are going to be very niche as far as their usefulness, but still worth mentioning, so I'm going to touch on these briefly here. But first I want to talk about the character whose name I am going to butcher in this video. I believe it's pronounced Guilahan? I don't know. I don't care. When it comes to this character, though, he is going to be very useful when it comes to specific instances in the game where you need burn resistance. This is going to be something that I can actually speak to personally, because I am currently in a position where I am in the hard mode difficulty of the story mode, and I definitely need that burn resistance for my team, and luckily this character is going to be able to offer that to the team through his passive. So this is a character that I would definitely recommend that you build up, because eventually you are going to need to use him for that burn resistance. Now, when it comes to how you would build this character, you can go a couple of different routes. You can either go with maybe a crit gear or an attack gear if you really want to try and get damage out of him. However, I would say that you're better off going with either skill level up gear or maybe even decreasing your cooldowns. Either way though, that would be my recommendation. Mainly I would just maybe try to go with the skill level up gear with this character, and that would be what I would recommend with him. Now when it comes to Ian here, Ian is going to be a character that is going to be particularly useful as far as resisting poison, so this is going to help you out in a big way. So with this character, I would definitely recommend him as well. Same thing applies here. I would recommend with him being a support, more than likely you're going to want to go with cooldown decrease or skill level up gear. Probably want to go with one of those two with him. I wouldn't necessarily say you should probably go trying to build him as some sort of DPS, but with these two characters, they're mainly going to fulfill niche roles, but those roles do end up being very important. Moving on now, we're going to talk about the next tier rarity, which is going to be the rare tier. Now, when it comes to the characters here, there's quite a few that can be useful, but I'm going to briefly touch on the most useful ones, at least in my opinion. So, right off the bat, you can talk about Juju, but with Juju, she does have limited capabilities in this game. She is going to be a character that mainly you would want to use for things such as Arena. She's also going to be a character that you could use from a lot of the different story modes. When it comes to this character, she is going to be a ranged damage dealer, and you'll probably want to go with either crit gear or attack gear with her for the most part, again leaning towards critical gear. Next up, we are going to talk about the next character on the list, and that is of course going to be Serena. So when it comes to Serena here, this is going to be a really useful character, you guys. You are going to want to build her up. This is going to be a character that is going to be very useful for a ton of the different dungeons. She's also going to be really good for story mode, and in general, with this character being a support type character for the most part, I would recommend that you would probably want to go with cooldown gear, because really when it comes to cooldown reduction, that is the way I would build most any of my characters if I'm wanting to lean into the support category. However, you can also try to go with a DPS option for a build with her as well, so that means you could either go with your crit gear, your attack gear, or so on and so forth. It's really up to you, but I would definitely say that this is a character that I would personally want to build with cooldown gear, and this is a character that I cannot stress enough how important she might be for your account going forward, especially on the late game, but this is a character that I definitely recommend that you build up. Next up here, let's go ahead and talk about Shay. Now, when it comes to Shay, this is a character that is going to be of the utmost importance as far as budget support types, and going forward in the game, this is going to be a character that is going to prove to be nothing but useful. So in regards to Shay, she is going to be a support type, so I would definitely recommend that you guys would probably just want to go with cooldown gear, just like almost any of your supports in the game. So that would be my recommendation with her. So with Shay here, definitely going to be worth picking up and building, because you will find her very useful going forward. Next up, the most useful of all of the budget DPSs in the entire game, this is going to be Shane. This character's job is damage, and thankfully she is going to be one that is very easily accessible right off the bat in this game, so I would highly recommend that you guys pick her up and build her. She is going to be extremely useful even at high levels. Now when it comes to this character being a DPS, of course you're going to want to go with either crit rate, or you're going to want to go ahead and go with attack. Either way you cut it, this character is going to be wonderful for damage, and I highly recommend that you guys look into investing in her, because this is a character that you are definitely going to want to use in the early game, maybe not so much in the late game once you have gotten characters that can do better damage, but overall you could do little better than Shane in the early stages of the game. Now next up here, I want to talk about Luki. Luki is an extremely useful character, particularly for the fact that he is going to have all of these attack speed buffs. He's also going to be a character with movement speed buffs. He is a character that also has that skill cooldown reset on his ultimate. So in general, this is a character that I highly recommend that you guys try to look into. Now when it comes to Luki, this is going to be a character that you can probably just go with the skill level up gear on, in my opinion. Although if you wanted to try and build him as more of a DPS, then you could go with a DPS build. But in general, I always like to go with my skill cooldowns and my skill level ups when available, so that's what I would recommend there. But in general, this is a character that is very, very good. So yeah, definitely want to take a look at these characters here, you guys. They are very useful for most any account, and in general, I think that's going to do it for me when it comes to most of what I'm seeing in the rare tier. There's plenty of different characters that I could talk about in here, but really, I think that you could kind of mix and match and replace a lot of those with the ones we've already talked about that are going to be doing their job but better. So in general, that is going to wrap it up in my opinion for the rare tier, at least for this video. Now, when it comes to the next tier, we're going to start talking about red border characters, otherwise known as your legendary and legendary plus characters. So there's going to be quite a few characters in here we're going to be talking about today. Now, we might as well just start off here and talk about Empress of Fodena Eileen. So this particular Eileen is going to be extremely good for PvP. She's going to just be a pure damage dealer for the most part. Now, as a result of that, you're just going to want to go with damage gear. So pretty much you want to go with crit or attack. And again, I always lean towards crit where available, but in general, she is going to be a wonderful PvP toon. This other Eileen here is going to be the Phoenix Empress Eileen. Now, pretty much this is going to be the Eileen that can revive herself once she's KO'd, and this is another PvP-oriented character, and kind of the same story as with the Fodena Eileen. I would definitely try to focus on crit gear with her, and that is going to get you through for the most part. Next up here, we have Evan. Now, when it comes to Evan, Evan is going to be probably the second best tank in the game at this point, probably just behind Rudy, which we'll talk about briefly. But when it comes to Evan here, he is going to be a character that as a tank, you are going to either want to go with block gear or defense gear, whichever one you have available. Again, like any tank, you can go ahead and mix and match if you need to, but I would definitely build him as a tank because that is his role, and as the second best tank in the game behind Rudy, he is going to be extremely useful for your account. Next up here, we are going to talk about Rachel. Now, when it comes to Rachel, Rachel is just pretty much good for anything. This is a character that is going to be extremely useful throughout most all the things in the game as a damage dealer, and in general, as a result of that, you're going to just want to build her as such, so definitely go with either your attack or your crit gear, and you are going to get a ton of usefulness and mileage out of this character throughout the game. This is another character that you will unlock for free eventually, so in general, highly recommend Rachel. Really, really solid DPS. Now, Karen. In my opinion, Karen is the most broken character currently available in all of Global. With this character, she is going to be a pure support and the best overall healer in the entire game, bar none. As a result of her being a support type character, I would try to go with your cooldown reduction gear. So that is definitely going to be the rate I would go with. So in general, I would definitely try to build her as a cooldown reduction character, but if you get her from that 7-day login, consider yourself lucky that we got that in Global, because they definitely gave us a huge boon to all of our accounts just for logging in every day, and in general, she is going to be a hard carry throughout the game. Next up, we're going to talk about Rudy. Now, Rudy is the best tank in the game, and as such, you are definitely going to want to use him for most things where you would need a tank. So when it comes to Rudy, I definitely recommend that you go with block or you go with defense. Either way you cut it with his gear, he is going to be very, very good, and you can even mix and match those as always. So in general, with Rudy, highly recommend him, a character that I am very, very high on in this game, and very happy with his performance in every facet. Next up, we have Spike. Now, Spike is going to be a character that can be really good for story. He can be really good for some of these dungeons, but in general, this is mainly going to be a PvP character, mainly because CC is the name of the game in Arena at the moment. Now, when it comes to him, this is a character that, because he is going to be built the way that he is, especially when he has this passive here with immortality, I would definitely recommend that you guys just go with your skill reduction or your skill level up gear. So that is going to be the rate I would go. So as you guys can see here, that's what I've got on mine currently. So that's the rate I would go with him, but you could go a couple of different ways and do just fine. Either way though, Spike is a wonderful arena toon, and I'm sure that if you have played any arena, arena, you are well aware of what you're getting into if you have this character. Next up, we are going to talk about Ming. Now, this Ming here is mainly just going to be useful for PvP. I really wouldn't say there's much of anything in the game that you would really use her for outside of that. Now, she is just going to be a pure DPS option, and therefore, as such, you want to go ahead and go with the usual suspects of either crit or attack. So, with Ming, very good character, although she is going to have isolated use cases, and for the most part, you're not going to be using her for a whole lot outside of PvP in my experience. Moving on now, let's go ahead and talk about Legendary plus Shane. Now, Nestra's disciple Shane here is going to be the second best DPS currently available in Global, behind Cassette, who we'll talk about momentarily. But when it comes to this Shane as being one of the best overall DPSs in the game entirely, I would definitely recommend that you build her as such. So the same rules apply here with the equipment as the rest of these DPS options. You will want to go ahead and go with either crit or attack with this character, and for the most part, that is going to do you just fine. As I've always said, you want to lean towards crit always when it comes to your DPS options, so that is the route I would go with this Shane, but if you have her, consider yourself lucky. Now, next up here we have Valder. Now, this Valder here isn't necessarily a character that I would invest in heavily, especially considering the fact that while he isn't bad, there are going to be plenty of other characters that are going to be able to fulfill his roles and do it better. However, you can do kind of a mixed option with this character and go one of a couple of different ways as a result when it comes to his equipment. So in my opinion, you're probably better off if you are investing in him to build him as a more of a DPS, so you want to go with your crit or your attack. But in general, this is a character that is going to be very useful. It's just not one that I would highly recommend as far as recommending him over some of these other characters in these higher tiers. Now, next up we have Elena's Sword Cassette. This is a character that is someone that should be heavily looked at by most everybody when it comes to prioritization, because this is going to be the best overall DPS in Global. Now, when it comes to Cassette, the main thing that you're going to want to consider with her is you're going to want to put DPS equipment on this character, so you're going to want to either go with your crit or your attack, and that is going to be the best route to go with this character. But as far as her usefulness, she is going to be useful across almost everything, and if you need DPS, this is going to be your option. Unfortunately, she is just going to be very tough to pull, but if you have her, count yourself extremely lucky. Next up, we have Dellins. Now, Dellins is a character that is extremely good. This is a character that I highly recommend to anybody, because he is going to have guaranteed crit on pretty much all of his skills. So you'll see there, he is going to have that fixed crit hit. This is a very important character. He's extremely good pretty much in anything and is very future proof. So very good character. Now, as a result of him having this passive here that is going to give him that fixed crit, I would say that you'll probably just want to go ahead and go with attack, because he doesn't need the extra crit because he's already guaranteed to crit. So this is a character, highly recommend him. Very good character, and you are going to love this one if you have him. Again, consider yourself very lucky if you end up pulling him, because he is going to be very useful. Now, next up, and the last character we're going to talk about, is going to be Yun-Hee. Now, this character here is going to be very good as well for a plethora of different things. Now, with this one, you're probably just going to want to go ahead and build her as a DPS. She is going to be a ranged character, so a ranged DPS, and one of the better ranged DPS is currently available. So with her, definitely want to go with the usual suspects with your equipment. So that means you're going to want to go with either crit or attack, and that's pretty much the route I would recommend when it comes to her. So that is going to do it for the most part, you guys, for the roster. There are other characters, especially in this kind of blue tier here, that I could have gotten into, but largely they're going to be characters such as maybe a Neo or this Rudy here, or maybe even I could have talked about, where is she? Melissa, so on and so forth. Now, these characters aren't bad. Even this Len here, she isn't bad either. But honestly, you guys, I don't want to make this video 30 minutes long, so I wanted to go ahead and just quickly go into a lot of the ones that are going to be the most important. But in general, most of these characters are going to be useful for the most part outside of your common characters, and really that is one of the better things about this game, in my opinion, is that you can get usefulness out of a lot of these lower tier characters, even in the higher difficulties, especially with the right investment. But I hope you guys found this beneficial and informative. If you did, smash that like button and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, you all take care. Peace.
Continue.